The blade was already pressing into the soft skin of Janeth's throat when Songjing's world narrowed to a single serrated thought. Not her. Never her. Not after the weeks of silence they had filled with whispered truths. Not after the way she had looked at his broken body and seen a man instead of a ghost. Not after she had become the only person in Seoul who didn't want something from him. Sign the papers, Songjing, Dae-young sneered, his voice oily with decades of resentment. Sign them and maybe I'll let the help go back to Africa in one piece. Songjing sat perfectly still in his state-of-the-art wheelchair, his expression like carved granite. To the guards in the room, he was a paralyzed husk, a king whose throne was now made of chrome and leather. But Janeth, even with steel against her windpipe, saw what the others missed. The rhythmic pulse in his temple, the way his knuckles turned white as he gripped the armrests. He wasn't giving up. He was hunting. Look at me, Janeth, Songjing commanded, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that vibrated in the tense air. His eyes met hers, dark, molten and promising 1,000 deaths. She's mine, Dio. If you spill a single drop of her blood, I will make sure the gates of hell are locked when you arrive. Then the mountain villa exploded into chaos. Janeth didn't scream, she acted. Drawing on the survival instincts she'd forged in the red dust of Uganda, she drove her elbow back into Dae-young's ribs. As he gasped, Songjing Suk, the man whose spine was supposed to be a dead circuit, the man the doctor said would never feel his feet again, did the impossible. He rose. His legs trembled with a violent, unnatural force, and his face contorted in a mask of pure agony, but he stood. Like a phantom rising from a grave, he took one staggering, agonizing step toward his cousin. His hand shot out, seizing Janeth's arm with a grip that was fierce, possessive and terrifyingly strong. Behind me, he rasped, his voice cracking with the effort of defying medical science. How was he standing? Why did the mere sight of her in danger override a severed nervous system? The answer lay 72 hours in the past, when a defiant physiotherapist from Kampala walked into a gilded cage and reminded a monster how to breathe. 3 days ago, Businga Janeth stared at an eviction notice that felt like a weight on her lungs. Her small Seoul apartment was freezing, the heater hummed a broken tune, and the silence was filled with the math of desperation. Family clinic debt, 50 million Ugandan shillings. Visa status, expiring in 14 days. Bank balance, 12,001, barely enough for a bowl of jajangmyeon. On her bedside table, a framed photo of her mother back in Kampala watched her with tired, hopeful eyes. The strength of a woman isn't in her hands, Businga, her mother used to say, it's in what she's willing to endure for those she loves. Janeth had endured the bush wars, she had endured the loss of her father, and she had endured the cold stares of a city that saw her as invisible. But she couldn't endure failing her family. Her phone vibrated on the wooden floor. An encrypted number. Miss Businga? The voice on the other end was clipped, professional, and smelled of old money and deep secrets. We've seen your credentials. We need someone who isn't afraid of a man who has lost everything and still thinks he owns the world. The pay is triple the market rate. But be warned, the last 3 therapists left in tears. 1 left in an ambulance. Janeth looked at the eviction notice, then at her mother's photo. She didn't have the luxury of fear. When do I start? She asked. Now, the voice replied. A car is outside. Welcome to the Suk estate, Miss Businga. Try to stay alive. The gray mist of Seoul's morning felt like a shroud as Businga Janeth stood before the iron gates of the Suk mountain villa. In her trembling hand, she clutched a final eviction notice for her family's clinic in Kampala, the ink bleeding under the drizzle. This wasn't just a job, it was a ransom for her mother's legacy. The black sedan that had brought her there sped away, leaving her in a silence so heavy it felt predatory. As the gates groaned open, a cold voice crackled over the intercom. 5 minutes late, Miss Businga. The last nurse lasted 4. Try not to bleed on the carpet. She was led through echoing marble halls by a housekeeper who refused to make eye contact, her footsteps the only sound in a house that felt like it was holding its breath. When the double doors to the master suite swung open, the air temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. There, silhouetted against a panoramic window, sat Songjing Suk. The phantom of Seoul was a jagged ruin of a man, his once lethal frame now trapped in a throne of carbon fiber and chrome. He didn't turn around. He didn't have to. The sheer gravity of his bitterness pulled the air from Janeth's lungs. I don't need a nurse, he rasped, his voice a jagged blade. I need an undertaker. Leave. I'm not here to bury you, Mr. Suk, Janeth countered, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. She stepped forward, her medical bag heavy with the weight of her only hope. I'm here to make you stand. Songjing spun his chair with a violent, jerky motion. His eyes were voids of frozen rage. Look at me, he roared, slamming his dead fist against his useless thigh. I am a corpse that still breathes. You are a scavenger looking for a paycheck. I am a woman who has seen real war, Janeth snapped, closing the distance until she was inches from his face. And I see a coward hiding behind a wheelchair. The insult hung in the air like a live wire. Songjing's hand suddenly shot out, catching her wrist in a grip that shouldn't have been possible for a paralyzed man. His eyes flared with a terrifying, predatory light. You think you're safe because I can't walk? He pulled her closer, his breath cold against her ear. There are worse things I can do to you than kill you. Just then the lights in the villa flickered and died. From the hallway, the heavy thud of a body hitting the floor echoed, followed by the metallic slide of a suppressed pistol being readied. Songjing's grip tightened to the point of breaking bone as he whispered, They're here to finish the job. And now, thanks to your pride, they're going to start with you. The darkness in the villa was absolute, smelling of ozone and impending death. Songjing's grip on Janeth's wrist was like an iron shackle, his fingers digging into her skin with a strength that defied his medical charts. Outside the heavy oak doors, the rhythmic thump-drag of a body being moved chilled Janeth to the bone. Don't scream, Songjing hissed into her ear, his voice stripped of its earlier arrogance and replaced with a lethal, focused clarity. If you breathe too loud they'll find the door. My cousin doesn't leave witnesses. Janeth forced her lungs to steady. She wasn't just a nurse, she was a survivor of the Kampala riots. She reached into her medical bag, her fingers brushing past bandages until they closed around a heavy, steel-bodied flashlight. I'm not the one who's screaming, she whispered back, her heart drumming against her ribs. She felt him shift, a subtle, agonizing movement of his upper body as he tried to shield her with a frame he couldn't even fully control. The door handle rattled. A soft, metallic click signaled the picking of the lock. Under the desk. Now, Songjing commanded, shoving her with a desperate strength that sent her sprawling onto the thick Persian rug. As she scrambled into the knee-hole of the massive mahogany desk, the door creaked open. A thin beam of light sliced through the room, illuminating the dust motes and the back of Songjing's wheelchair. A man stepped in, the silhouette of a silenced submachine gun held low. Daeyoung wants to know where the documents are, boss, the assassin mocked, his voice a low gravel. Tell me and I'll make sure the African girl dies quickly. Janeth saw Songjing's hand drop from the armrest hanging near the wheel. He looked pathetic, a broken king waiting for the end. But as the assassin stepped closer, Songjing's eyes caught the faint light. They weren't the eyes of a victim, they were the eyes of a trap. Come closer, Songjing rasped. I'll tell you where everything is buried. The assassin leaned in, the barrel of the gun inches from Songjing's chest. In that heartbeat, Janeth realized Songjing wasn't looking at the killer. He was looking at her. He gave a microscopic nod. Janeth lunged from under the desk, slamming her heavy flashlight into the back of the assassin's knee. As the man buckled, Songjing's hand shot out, grabbing the hot barrel of the gun, redirecting the muzzle just as a muffled thud-thud-thud of bullets tore into the floorboards. The two men grappled, a paralyzed man fighting a killer with nothing but spite and upper body strength. Run, Janeth! Songjing roared. But as she reached the door, she skidded to a halt. The hallway wasn't empty. Standing there, illuminated by the emergency lights of the villa, was Daeyoung himself. He wasn't looking at the struggle. He was holding a remote detonator, his thumb hovering over the red button. I didn't just come for the documents, cousin, Daeyoung smiled, his eyes glinting with madness. I came to burn the evidence of your existence. The floor beneath them let out a low, mechanical groan as the villa's self-destruct sequence hummed to life. Janeth, get out! Songjing screamed, pinned beneath the assassin. She looked at the exit, then at the man who had just risked his life to shield her. The countdown on the wall hit 10 seconds. Janeth didn't run for the door, she ran back toward the wheelchair. The countdown clock pulsed a toxic red, 6 seconds. Janeth didn't grab the door frame, she grabbed the handles of the heavy, motorized wheelchair. With a guttural cry, she hauled the massive frame backward just as the assassin scrambled to regain his weapon. Songjing's eyes widened in disbelief as she leveraged her entire body weight, swiveling him toward the reinforced library balcony. Jump! She screamed over the rising mechanical whine of the self-destruct. I can't jump, you fool! Songjing roared, but his hands were already moving, locking onto her forearms. In a blur of heat and glass, the office windows shattered outward. They didn't jump. They fell, tumbled into the dark abyss of the mountain slope just as a concussive blast ripped through the suite above. The shockwave tossed the wheelchair like a toy, throwing them into the freezing slush of the ravine. Silence followed, broken only by the crackle of burning debris raining from the sky. Janeth groaned, her lungs burning from the icy air. She crawled through the mud, her fingers searching frantically until they touched cold metal and wet wool. Songjing lay pinned beneath the wreckage of his chair, his face ghostly pale in the firelight. "Are you alive?" she gasped, coughing up silt. Songjing's eyes snapped open. He didn't answer. Instead he looked down at his right leg. A jagged piece of rebar had pierced through his thigh during the fall. Janeth's medical training kicked in, her hands moving to stem the blood, but she froze. Songjing wasn't screaming. He wasn't even flinching. He was staring at the wound with a terrifying, hollow expression. "I can't feel it," he whispered, a single tear cutting through the soot on his cheek. "Even with a rod through my bone, there is nothing. I am dead from the waist down, Janeth. Let me stay here. Let the fire have me." "No," Janeth hissed, her eyes blazing with a fierce, stubborn light. She took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. "You felt my hand in that room. You moved for me. I saw it." She reached into her bag, pulling out a small vial of her mother's concentrated herbal oil, a stimulant she had saved for the brink of hope. She pressed it into the open wound, the scent of bitter roots blooming in the cold air. Suddenly a flashlight beam cut through the woods above. Daeyong's voice echoed down the ravine, cold and methodical. "Find the bodies. If the fall didn't kill them, use the brass knuckles. I want to feel the phantom's ribs break." Janeth looked at the hunters above, then at the man dying in her arms. She didn't have the strength to carry him, and he didn't have the legs to run. She leaned in close, her lips brushing his ear. "If you want to live, you have to let me do something that will hurt more than the bullet." She grabbed the rebar. Above them, the boots of the assassins crunched on the gravel, less than 20 feet away. Janeth braced her feet and pulled. As the metal shrieked against bone, Songjing's mouth opened in a silent scream, and his left toes curled into the mud. But as the blood pooled, Janeth realized they weren't alone in the ravine. A pair of glowing eyes watched them from the shadows of the cave behind them, and a low, hungry growl rumbled through the earth. They were trapped between executioners, a monster, and a body that refused to wake up. The low rumble from the cave mouth vibrated through Songjing's chest, a sound more primal and terrifying than the fire raging above. Two amber eyes fixed on them, a mountain predator drawn by the scent of fresh blood. "Janeth," Songjing whispered, his voice shaking not from fear, but from the sheer agony of the toxin and the rebar. "The guards have guns. The beast has teeth. Leave me. Take the bag and climb the eastern ridge. It's the only way. In my village, we don't leave the wounded for the hyenas," Janeth hissed. She didn't run. Instead, she reached into her medical kit and pulled out a flare and a surgical scalpel. Her eyes shifted from the glowing eyes in the cave to the flashlights dancing on the cliff above. "And I certainly don't leave my patient." She knew the anatomy. If she could trigger a massive autonomic response, she might bypass the neurosuppressant in his system for just a few seconds. She didn't explain. She simply slammed the flare against a rock, ignition blinding the darkness, and thrust the white-hot casing toward Songjing's unfeeling calf. The smell of singed wool and ozone filled the air. For 3 agonizing seconds nothing happened. Then a primal roar ripped from Songjing's throat, not a cry of pain but a scream of reconnection. His back arched, his hands clawing at the mud, and his right leg kicked out with the force of a piston, striking the wreckage of the wheelchair. "I felt it," he gasped, his eyes blown wide with shock. "I felt the heat." "Then move." Janeth grabbed his collar, dragging him toward the narrow crevice beside the cave just as a hail of bullets from the ridge shredded the mud where they had been lying. Daeyong's men were rappelling down now, their tactical boots hitting the floor of the ravine with heavy thuds. The predator in the cave, spooked by the flare and the gunfire, lunged, not at the wounded pair, but at the first assassin who stepped into its path. The ravine became a symphony of screams, animal roars and suppressed gunfire. Janeth and Songjing huddle in the shadows of the crevice, their bodies pressed together for warmth and concealment. As the chaos unfolded feet away, Janeth's hand found his. His grip was no longer just a reflex, it was a choice. "Why?" he whispered, looking at her as if seeing her for the first time. "Why risk everything for a ghost?" Janeth looked at the fire reflecting in his dark pupils. "Because even ghosts deserve a second chance." She pulled a burner phone from her pocket, one she had swiped from the housekeeper earlier. There was one message on the screen sent 2 minutes ago. Her face turned ashen. We have your mother, Janet. If the phantom doesn't die tonight, the clinic in Kampala burns with her inside. The high-stakes choice was no longer about survival. It was about who would be sacrificed. As the last assassin fell to the beast and Dae-young's shadow loomed over the ravine's edge, Janeth felt the cold weight of a gun being pressed into her hand. Finish it, Janeth, Songjing said, his voice devoid of emotion as he looked at the phone screen. Kill me now or you lose everything. The cold steel of the handgun felt like a block of ice against Janeth's palm. Above them, the villa continued to groan, a skeleton of fire silhouetting the man who held her mother's life in his hands. Dae-young stood at the edge of the ravine, peering into the smoke, unaware that the help he had threatened was currently holding the power to end his coup. Janeth, look at me, Songjing commanded, his voice eerily calm amidst the carnage. He reached up, his hand steadying hers, the muzzle of the gun now resting directly over his heart. If you don't kill me, he will kill her. He needs my death to claim the Suk heritage. Give it to him. Save your mother. Janeth's eyes blurred with tears. The high-stakes math of the moment was simple and cruel, one life for another. But as she looked into Songjing's dark eyes, she didn't see a monster. She saw a man who had finally found something worth dying for. I am a healer, Songjing, she whispered, her finger trembling against the trigger. I don't take lives. I save them. Then you are choosing a dead man over a living mother, he roared, trying to jerk the gun closer. Suddenly Janeth noticed something. The blood pooling beneath Songjing wasn't the dark, sluggish red of a dying man. It was bright, oxygenated, and pulsing with a rhythm that matched her own. The miracle wasn't just in his nerves, it was in his blood. The adrenaline of the threat to her mother was doing what the therapy couldn't, it was forcing his body to fight back against the neurotoxin. I'm not choosing, Janeth said, her voice turning to steel. She didn't point the gun at him. She pointed it at the ledge above. I'm changing the game. She fired a single shot into the air, the crack echoing like a thunderbolt through the ravine. Dae-young froze, his eyes locking onto their position. He's alive. Dae-young screamed to his remaining men. Finish them both. As the mercenaries began their final descent, Janeth didn't flee. She leaned over Songjing and slammed her fist into the pressure point she had studied for weeks, the T10 nerve cluster. Stand up, Phantom, she screamed. Stand up and save us both. Songjing's body convulsed. A guttural, animalistic sound tore from his throat as he grabbed the edge of the stone crevice. With a scream that shook the very foundation of the mountain, he hauled himself upward. His legs didn't just twitch, they locked. He stood. Shaky, bloody, and leaning heavily against the rock, but he stood. But as he reached for Janeth, the burner phone in her pocket began to chime again. It wasn't a text this time. It was a video call. The screen flickered to life, showing her mother bound in a chair, a man holding a torch to the thatch roof of the clinic. One more step, Songjing, Dae-young's voice boomed from the ridge, and I tell him to drop the fire. Janeth froze, the gun slipping from her fingers. Songjing was standing, but his triumph was a death sentence. He was caught in the ultimate trap. To move was to kill the only person Janeth loved, but to stay still was to let them both be slaughtered in the mud. The torch flame on the phone screen flickered, a tiny orange spark threatening to erase Janeth's entire world. Time seemed to liquefy. Songjing stood, a blood-stained specter of his former self, his legs trembling under the weight of a body that had forgotten how to support him. He looked at the video of the bound woman in Kampala, then at Janeth's face, etched with a grief so profound it silenced the storm. Do it, Dae-young. Songjing's roar echoed off the ravine walls, but it wasn't a plea. It was a command. He took a staggering step forward, his hand snapping out to snatch the phone from Janeth's numb fingers. He held the screen up to his own face, his eyes burning with a terrifying, cold lucidity. Drop the fire, you coward. But know this, the moment that flame hits the thatch, I stop being a man. I become the Phantom again. And I will spend every second of my remaining life making sure you watch your own empire turn to ash before I tear your heart out with my bare hands. Dae-young's laughter crackled through the speaker, thin and hysterical. You're a cripple in a ditch, Songjing. You have nothing left to threaten me with. I have my ghost, Songjing whispered. He looked at Janeth, a silent signal passing between them. Janeth understood. She didn't look at the phone, she looked at the mercenary rappelling down the cliff side directly above Dae-young. She grabbed the discarded handgun, not aiming for the cousin, but for the fuel line of the damaged, idling sedan perched at the edge of the ridge. Crack. The bullet sparked against the metal. A secondary explosion, smaller but more violent than the first, rocked the ridge. The sedan tilted, sliding toward the ravine and forcing De Jong to dive for cover, the remote detonator slipping from his hand. In that heartbeat of chaos, Songjing lunged. He didn't use his legs to run. He used them to pivot, throwing his entire weight into the mercenary who had just reached the bottom of the ravine. They went down in a tangle of limbs and steel. Songjing didn't fight like a soldier. He fought like a man who had already been to hell and found it wanting. But as the dust settled, a new sound emerged, the heavy rhythmic beat of a helicopter. A searchlight swept the ravine, blinding them. "Drop your weapons," a voice boomed from above. Janeth looked up, hoping for salvation, but Songjing's face went pale. "It's not the police," he rasped, his legs finally giving out as he collapsed back into the mud. "It's the board of directors. My father." The helicopter touched down on the ridge and a tall, silver-haired man stepped out, looking down at his two sons, one a traitor, one a miracle. He didn't look at them with love, but with the cold appraisal of a man checking his inventory. He raised a hand and a dozen red laser dots appeared on Janeth's chest. "A miracle is only useful if it can be controlled, Songjing," the old man called down. "The girl is a variable I didn't account for. Eliminate her or I'll eliminate you both." The red dots on Janeth's chest danced like blood-hungry insects. Standing on the ridge, the patriarch of the Suk family looked down with the clinical detachment of a god watching ants. In that moment, the true horror of the Incheon setup was revealed. It hadn't been a coup by the cousin but a test by the father. A test Songjing had failed by becoming weak enough to love. "Kill her, Songjing," the old man's voice boomed over the rotors. "Prove that the phantom is back and I will restore your throne. The clinic in Kampala will be funded for a century. Your mother will be a queen. All it costs is one bullet." Janeth looked at Songjing. He was standing but his legs were shaking, his face a mask of sweat and blood. He looked at the gun in his hand, then at Janeth. The silence between them was a vacuum, sucking the oxygen out of the ravine. "Do it," Janeth whispered, her voice barely audible over the helicopter. "Save your mother. Save mine. My life is a small price for their safety." Songjing raised the gun. The laser dots on Janeth's heart remained steady. He took a breath, his finger tightening on the trigger. Then, his eyes shifted to the patriarch. "You're right, father," Songjing rasped, his voice regaining that terrifying, glacial edge. "A miracle is only useful if it can be controlled." He spun. In one fluid, impossible motion he fired, not at Janeth but at the helicopter's tail rotor. The explosion was deafening. As the aircraft spiraled into the mountainside in a plume of orange fire, Songjing didn't watch it fall. He collapsed, his legs finally giving out for good, falling into Janeth's waiting arms. "I chose," he choked out, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. "I chose life." 6 months later, the red dust of Uganda swirled around the tires of a modest jeep. Songjing Suk sat in the passenger seat, a hand-carved cane resting against his knee. He would never walk without it, and the phantom was officially dead to the world, buried in the ashes of the mountain villa. As they pulled up to the newly rebuilt Businga clinic, Janeth's mother ran out, her laughter filling the warm air. Janeth stepped out of the driver's seat, her hand instinctively resting on the slight swell of her stomach. Songjing watched her, his eyes no longer glacial, but full of a light he had never thought possible. He had lost an empire, but he had found his soul in the woman who refused to let him rot. "Are you ready for the quiet life, Songjing?" Janeth asked, leaning through the window to kiss him. He looked at the vibrant marketplace, the children playing in the dirt, and the woman who had saved him. "The quiet life is the only one worth fighting for," he replied. But as they walked toward the clinic, a black sedan with tinted windows parked at the edge of the village, its engine idling. A man inside adjusted his glasses, looking at a file marked Suk Recovery. The world might have forgotten the phantom, but the shadows of Seoul had long memories. Thank you for watching this segment of our stories. For more interesting videos, please subscribe by clicking the bell button.